since it was well known that Timothy's father was a Greek and that he had grown up not as a Jew, he would not have been circumcised. And they would know that. And so Paul said, we did this to him not because he needed it for salvation, but it was expedient so we could get him to listen to us.
And so we would say of Titus, we're not going to circumcise him. It is not necessary. We will say of Timothy, although it's not necessary, it is expedient.
Yeah.
We'll keep ourselves from getting into problems. Let's just go ahead and do this.
There are others in the church, though, who'd come in a whole different way than Paul did and with a different point of view. And now you're going to have this moment where in Jerusalem they're going to meet to talk about it. And one of the things I think is amazing is this isn't just a minor change in a program. This is a major sea breeze change. And how do you delicately bring people along who've grown up under one system, introduce a brand new system for others without offending both groups and causing dissension in the church?
That was such a major problem. This can be described this way. This is what happens when new revelation confronts tradition.
Yep, that's an excellent way to say that.
Notice in the chapter 15 of Acts, Peter rises up, reminds them of the experience he has had with Cornelius. Let's get that on the...
This is verse 7,
yeah,
right?
Verse 7. And then he said, notice in verse 10, Brother Matthews, read for us verses 10 and 11.
Now therefore, why tempt ye God to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear?
Meaning?
None of us kept the law of Moses to perfection.
Who can keep the 613 commandments perfectly? None of us.
You know, a good point, Bob, on this. Brother Matthews brought up the point that he probably met with the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 before this conference ever was convened to agree on certain things. And I think both Peter and Paul agree that the law, in this case in verse 10, was a yoke. In Galatians 2, Paul says, why go back to that bondage? They're both, they see it the same way.
Yes.
They're both
like
in agreement.
The Nephites in the Book of Mormon who said, we keep the law until Christ comes, but it's a bondage to us, it's a yoke, it holds us back. But we know that we're under oath to keep it until that moment. And now they're trying to reverse that.
Yeah.
Verse 11, Bob?
But we believe that through the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, we shall be saved, even as they.
Okay, there's that concept again. Now let's set this up. We don't have a lot of time to do this. What's the issue here? James, who presumably, this new James, is presumably a member of the First Presidency. We have Paul as a factor, Peter, they seem to be together. We have James, who seems to feel some special responsibility for the saints in Jerusalem, many of whom were still a bit tied to the law of Moses. And bless his heart, you have this wonderful Peter trying to hold the church together. And you can almost see Saul, young and impetuous, brilliant, but pushing on this side, and you've got the Jewish Christians over here pushing on this side, and poor Peter trying to hold those two horses.
One thing that we all have to learn is patience. And again, you have the revelation, the doctrine has been announced, but you have to be patient with getting people to come around to it. And so I thought you said it well. Here's Peter trying to keep the church together. Peter is a magnificent administrator. And James has the confidence of the Jewish part of the church in and around Jerusalem. So Peter presides, but he has James conduct the meeting.
Bob, we presume this is James, the brother of the Lord?
Yeah, it has to be. Rather interesting that he probably replaced the other James.
That's correct.
You know, I just thought this is a great lesson for us. We have members of the church who are committed at varying degrees of levels. All of us are. And there may be some in a group when a commandment or a program is being moved forward that struggle a little bit. There may be others who are ready to go. And one of the gifts of leadership is to find that delicate balance, to bring people along and at the same time hold others in a place where they can be of service. Just very quickly, when Brigham Young came to Salt Lake City, there were some saints who wanted to leave the valley. California had gold. California had a better growing season, better weather. It's got Disneyland, you know, later. And Brigham Young had a dream one night. He went to pick up some sheep in Davis County, and he saw the wildest, oddest flock of sheep coming towards him. And as he walked past them, some were decrepit dwarfs, some had long, shaggy hair, some were perfect. And then he noticed the man in the wagon herding them was Joseph Smith. And he said, I looked at him and I said, Joseph, what are you going to do with all of this most interesting group of sheep? He said the most interesting group he'd ever seen. And Joseph said, they're all good in their place, Brigham. They're all good in their place. And he said he woke up the next day and had learned that every member is good in their place. And not all will be able to make the same commitment and contribution.
Excellent story. So, one of the difficulties is what kind of a decision will we get rendered here? And James takes the podium now. Very interesting. James, a member of the First Presidency. Peter yields the floor to James, and James makes a recommendation. What is the nature of that recommendation? Where is it? Starting in verse 18. Ray, why don't you read that for us?
Known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. Wherefore my sentence is, that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to God. But that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood.
One more verse.
For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day.
There's the stickler. That's the key to the whole decision.
This is interesting, isn't it?
Yep.
This is clearly Paul, well, I won't say clearly, but it just may be the case that Paul left this conference a little frustrated. Why? They didn't go as far as he wanted them to go. What's the answer? Well, clearly, we will not require the Gentiles to live the law of Moses that come into the church. What's unresolved?
They didn't say what the Jews do.
What about the Jews in the future? Does that Jewish Christian father, does he circumcise his son? Do they observe the law of Moses? And so, I remember hearing Brother Matthews years ago say, one of the more important things to come out of this Jerusalem conference is ambiguity. That is, there's progress made, but it's a half step forward.
And a necessary half step. To push it all the way might have caused some real dissension and feelings, but to move it along a step at a time allowed people to grow into it.
As a wonderful general authority said to a dear friend of mine once, he said, always remember, people are more important than truth.